I did not expect the first words spoken at my father's funeral to feel like a warning, but that is exactly what they felt like. A quiet shiver of danger beneath the low murmur of cousins and distant relatives. I could sense it even before I crossed the threshold of the old church. Something in the air carried a crackle of held breath, as if everyone knew a storm was coming and were just waiting for it to break open across the polished wooden pews. I remember hesitating at the doorway for a moment, gripping the strap of my bag, telling myself that all I needed to do was get through a few hours without letting anyone tear open the grief I had been keeping stitched together since the day he passed. That was all, a simple goal. A quiet funeral. Nothing more. My name is Rowan. Most people in my family say it quickly, almost swallowed, as if pausing long enough to acknowledge me might accidentally imply respect. My father was the only one who ever said it like it mattered, like it meant strength. Standing there, breathing in the solemn air of the church, I felt a fresh sting knowing he would never say it again. I walked down the aisle slowly, ignoring the tiny glances thrown in my direction. Every family has its own cold currents, and ours always flowed around me. I heard two aunts whispering about how tired I looked. I heard my cousin mumble something about trouble always following me. I kept my eyes forward until I saw the framed photo of my father near the front, the one where he was laughing so hard his eyes nearly closed. That softened something inside me. For a moment, it even gave me enough courage to ignore the presence sitting near the front on the right. Marlene. She lifted her gaze the way a cat watches a bird that has flown too close. Her mouth curled into that familiar smile that never reached her eyes, a smile she had perfected over the years, for moments when she wanted to look gracious while quietly drawing blood. She had married my father's younger brother 2 decades ago, and from the moment she set foot in the family, she made it known that she was the one who understood respectability, decorum, and tradition. In her mind, I represented none of those things. She always treated me as if my existence were a small but persistent inconvenience she wished someone would correct. I chose a seat on the opposite side of the room, far enough from her that I could pretend not to feel her gaze on the back of my neck. The pastor began speaking, his voice soothing in a distant way, but grief makes sound strange. Everything feels both too loud and too muffled, like the world has cotton in its ears. I tried to breathe evenly. I tried to listen. I tried to hold myself together. My father deserved at least that much. But then I saw Marlene shift in her seat. It was subtle at first, just a straightening of her spine, a tilt of her chin. She smoothed her skirt with theatrical precision. I knew that movement. I had seen it at Thanksgiving dinners, birthday gatherings, any moment when she sensed the room drifting away from her control. It was the gesture she used before she inserted herself into the center of the stage. I felt a low hum of dread travel down my ribs. The pastor paused to turn a page in his notes. That was all the space she needed. She stood. The room stilled instantly. She walked toward the microphone with the prim steadiness of a woman who believed she had been chosen to deliver divine judgment. I felt my heart thud once, hard. This was not her moment. This was not her place. But Marlene had never cared about places or moments that belonged to others. She only cared about the power she could take. She lifted her chin and smiled sweetly at the crowd. When she spoke, her voice dripped sugar over steel. He always said Rowan was the disappointment of the family. The words echoed. A slap would have hurt less. I felt every set of eyes land on me, searching, gauging, waiting for me to crack. Instead, I slid my hand into my bag and touched the sealed envelope my father had left only for me. I did not open it, not yet. I held it like a promise, steady and silent. Then I sat back down and said nothing at all. Let her think she had won. I moved through the reception like I was underwater, everything thick and slow, every voice muffled beneath the memory of Marlene's words. No one looked directly at me, though I could feel their glances brushing against my skin like cold fingertips. They wanted to pretend they had not heard her accuse me of being my father's disappointment, as if silence could erase the sting of it. I watched them drift toward the food table, toward polite conversations, toward anything that spared them from acknowledging what had just happened. Their avoidance only made the humiliation throb more sharply. My uncle approached me with a weak smile that bent inward like he was already bracing for Marlene's reaction to whatever he said. He apologized in a quiet voice, full of half-formed excuses. He said she was grieving, she was overwhelmed, she did not mean it. I nodded without responding, because arguing with him felt pointless. My father had warned me in his last months that something was off, something he did not trust, but he never told me what it was. He would stop mid-sentence sometimes, eyes distant, then say he would explain everything when the time was right. That time never came. The sealed envelope in my pocket felt heavier with every passing minute. I could almost imagine it pulsing against my thigh, holding truths that were waiting to break free. I knew it contained whatever he had not been able to say aloud. I knew he had written it for a reason, and still I could not bring myself to open it. The weight of it was pressure and comfort all at once, a promise I was not sure I wanted to fulfill. I slipped out of the reception hall and into a quiet corridor, where the hum of conversation faded into a distant blur. For the first time since the ceremony began, I let myself breathe. I leaned against the wall and pulled the envelope from my pocket. The paper was smooth and warm from my body heat. I traced the flap with the tip of my finger, feeling the faint ridges of dried adhesive, the subtle give of the folded edge. My father's handwriting spelled my name on the front, steady and sure, Rowan. Seeing it there tugged at something in my chest. He had known this moment would come. He had known I would need answers. I almost opened it right then, almost tore the seal in one swift motion, almost surrendered to the curiosity that burned through me. But a distant burst of laughter from the reception snapped me back. I closed my fingers around the envelope. Not yet. Opening it alone in a hallway felt wrong, too small for whatever truth waited inside. I needed to face the room again. I needed to face her again. When I re-entered the reception, Marlene was exactly where I expected her to be, sitting with perfect posture at the center table, smiling like she was the grieving widow, rather than the spouse of a man still very much alive. Her eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand, sharp and greedy, as if she already suspected it held something she did not want revealed. I walked past her without acknowledging her gaze. I could feel her watching me, tracking every step. I reached my table, set down my untouched cup, and placed the sealed envelope beside it. The room continued its brittle chatter, but beneath it I felt the tension curling tighter, an unspoken awareness that something was shifting. I looked at the letter. Marlene looked at me. Neither of us moved. We were waiting for the other to make the first mistake. Back home after the funeral, sleep will not come no matter how many times I try to close my eyes. My apartment feels too quiet, as if the silence itself is listening. I pace from the living room to the kitchen and back again, replaying moments from the last few months of my father's life. Every memory feels sharper now, edges exposed without the softening presence of his voice. I remember how he grew quieter near the end, how he would pause in the middle of conversations, as if weighing what he could say and what he should not. I remember the neat rows of folders he kept on the shelf in his study, organized with almost obsessive care during those final weeks. He kept telling me there were things he had to settle before he passed, things he needed to make right, but he never found the strength to explain what he meant. The envelope sits on my coffee table, untouched but impossible to ignore. I stare at it for a long time before finally picking it up. My hands tremble as I slide a finger under the flap and lift it just enough to see the first line of his handwriting. The familiar curve of his letters is like a spark of warmth in my chest. But the moment I register the first few words, something tightens inside me. I close it again. The act feels like pulling a door shut before a storm can blow. It open. I am not ready for whatever truth he wrote down. Not yet. Morning comes without warning, and I decide I cannot stay trapped in my apartment with my thoughts circling like vultures. I take the letter with me and drive to his workshop on the edge of town. The place still smells like sawdust and oil, the scent so strong that it snaps my breath short. His tools hang on the wall exactly the way he left them. I imagine him standing there, hands steady, eyes focused on the wood in front of him. He was always calm here, always certain of himself. One of his old neighbors stops by and tells me my uncle had been visiting more often in the last few months, asking questions about my father's projects, digging into things that were none of his concern. The neighbor shakes his head, muttering about debts and poor choices. From there, I drive to the diner my father loved. The server recognizes me instantly, and her expression softens with sympathy. She leans in and lowers her voice as if afraid Marlene might be hiding under the counter. She tells me there were arguments behind closed doors, tense conversations about inheritance and control, whispers that my uncle and his wife were trying to secure access to parts of my father's estate before he passed. Her words settle uneasily in my stomach. I think about Marlene at the funeral, smiling like a woman who believed she was already victorious. I leave the diner and sit in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ache. I still cannot bring myself to open the letter. Instead, I hold it in my lap like a fragile weapon, its weight pressing into me with the promise of answers I am not yet brave enough to face. By the time the sun begins to set, I find myself parked outside Marlene's house. Warm light spills through the windows, the silhouettes of figures moving inside. I rest the envelope on my lap and stare at the house, feeling the truth inside it thrumming like a live wire. The answer is right here, fully written, waiting for me to read it. And I refuse to open it. The gathering takes place in my aunt's living room, a space she has arranged to resemble importance. Everything is too polished, too deliberate, as if she believes appearances alone can grant her authority. Family members cluster in awkward circles, murmuring about paperwork and arrangements, their voices tight with the uneasy knowledge that things are about to shift. I step inside quietly, the sealed envelope tucked safely in my coat pocket, its presence a steady weight against my ribs. I keep a neutral expression, though inside I feel currents pulling in directions I cannot yet name. Marlene stands near the fireplace, speaking to a small audience that seems trapped between politeness and fear. She talks with her hands, graceful and dismissive at the same time, as if she is brushing away unseen dust. She insists she is only trying to help manage my father's legacy, because someone needs to be responsible. Her tone drips with condescension, a syrupy sweetness that barely disguises the steel beneath. She brings up my job, my stalled career, the choices she claims to worry about. She phrases it as concern, but every word is a needle meant to pierce skin rather than heal wounds. My uncle sits beside her, shoulders curved inward, his silence the predictable surrender he has perfected over years of her domination. He avoids my eyes, staring at the carpet as if the pattern might reveal instructions for how to behave. The rest of the family shifts in their seats. They know what she is doing. They know it is wrong. None of them speak. None of them ever have. The pressure in my chest rises, slow and steady, the kind of tightening that warns something is nearing its limit. I take a seat near the edge of the room, the envelope warm beneath my coat. I watch the way Marlene commands the space, how she subtly redirects every conversation back to herself. She has been waiting for this moment, preparing for it, building a narrative in which she becomes the guardian of my father's memory, while everyone else falls in line. She believes the authority is already hers. She believes she has already won. Then she looks straight at me, her voice softening into a tone meant to appear compassionate. She says she knows how hard this must be for someone like me, considering my father had told her he regretted how I turned out. The words land with the force of a blow. There is a brief silence in the room, the kind that tightens the air until even breathing feels disloyal. Something crystallizes inside me, not anger, not grief. Something colder, steadier, shaped by the truth I have been carrying but refusing to read. I reach into my coat and pull out the envelope. The motion draws every gaze in the room. Conversations stop. Chairs creak as bodies turn. Even the air feels as though it pauses mid-breath. Marlene's face drains of color. Her eyes lock onto the envelope as if it were a blade pointed directly at her. I hold it in my hand, letting the silence stretch long enough for her nerves to fray. Then I say, in a voice that is calm and level, that my father left final words meant for this family, words he wanted heard only when the right moment arrived. I do not open the envelope. Instead, I place it on the table in the center of the room, still sealed, my fingers resting on it for a single heartbeat, before I draw my hand back. The room holds perfectly still. Marlene and I lock eyes across the space, and in that charged quiet, the promise of her unraveling hangs between us like a held breath waiting to drop. The room feels colder than it should, the kind of cold that comes not from temperature, but from tension so thick it slows every movement. Family members sit in a tight circle, no one speaking, no one willing to look directly at the envelope resting in the center of the table. I can feel their fear and their curiosity mixing in the air. Marlene sits rigidly near the fireplace, her hands neatly folded, her smile stretched thin enough to crack. She keeps glancing at the envelope like it might leap off the table and attack her. I sit across from her, the silence between us stretched so tight it might snap with the slightest touch. I reach forward, steady and deliberate, and pick up the envelope. It feels heavier than it did before, as if my father's truth gained weight while waiting. I slide my thumb under the flap and tear it open. The sound is soft, but in the stillness it rings like something loud and final. I unfold the letter, careful with the paper, and see my father's handwriting filling the page. The familiar strokes hit me with a wave of emotion I push quickly aside. I steady myself and begin to read. His words start quietly, describing his love for me, his pride, and the things he wished he had more time to say. But then the tone shifts, and the weight of his silence during his final months suddenly makes sense. He lays out everything he uncovered about Marlene. The bank statements showing money transferred into accounts that did not belong to her. The documents he found missing from his study. The pressure she placed on him while he was too sick to fight, using his weakness to gain access to parts of the estate she had no claim to. He writes about the day she threatened to block medical decisions unless he gave her what she wanted. My breath catches as I read those lines, imagining him trapped in a hospital bed, while she circled like a predator. The room stays utterly still as my voice continues. I read the part where he discovered the lies she had spread about me in an attempt to undermine my credibility with the family, trying to ensure no one would believe me if I ever challenged her. My father explains that he collected every piece of evidence and placed it with his attorney, sealed and notarized, set to be released if she ever attempted to hijack his legacy. He wrote that he hoped she would choose honesty, but if she did not, the truth would speak for him. I finish the final lines and lower the letter. No one moves. Then the attorney, who has been waiting quietly in the corner, stands and confirms every word. He presents additional documents, stamped and signed, detailing the extent of her actions. The impact hits the room like a wave. My uncle's face crumples as he realizes the depth of her manipulation. Relatives who once avoided confrontation turn on her with anger and disbelief. Her mask cracks. Her breath stutters. She reaches for explanations that do not exist. There is no escape for her, no argument, no path forward. She is stripped of every bit of authority she tried to claim, every ounce of influence she believed belonged to her, every shred of credibility she once wielded like a blade. I fold the letter quietly, slide it back into the torn envelope, and stand. I do not look at her again. I walk toward the door, the soft murmur of shock behind me fading with each step. When I leave the room, it feels like a gavel striking wood. Final, absolute. Later, when I am alone, I think about the pattern beneath it all. Families hide their sharpest knives behind gentle smiles. Betrayal often grows from the hands we trusted most. Truth rises eventually, slow but unstoppable, like a tide that refuses to remain buried. Sometimes survival requires speaking the words someone else tried to silence. My story is not unique. It is only one version of a truth that repeats in countless homes. And somewhere, someone else is holding their own sealed letter, waiting for the moment they finally choose to open it.